Hi, I'm James Dickey, Senior Counsel for the Upper Midwest Law Center, and welcome back to the Minnesota Law Report, where we update you on what's going on in Minnesota law and how we at the Upper Midwest Law Center are fighting for you in the courts, litigating for liberty and the rule of law. Today, I am joined by Dr. Scott Jensen and Attorney Greg Joseph in a very special episode coming right on the heels of our argument in the case Jensen versus Minnesota Board of Medical Practice, a case that Greg and myself are acting as lead and co-counsel on. So first of all, you may wonder, what exactly is this case about? I'm going to go ahead and turn it over right to the horse's mouth and ask Dr. Jensen, tell the people in our audience, what exactly have you had to go through as a result of the Minnesota Board of Medical Practice's actions from 2020 all the way through your campaign for governor up to 2022 and even beyond?
For 3 years, I have been investigated, and at times it certainly felt like accused by the Minnesota Board of Medical Practice for reckless speech, for allegations that make no sense and did not come from patients who ever met me in the office or received care. I could give a speech on the Senate floor, or I could give a speech at a governor's campaign rally, and that was enough to trigger a complaint. Today in the court, I heard words like invite, and in the briefs, I see words like inquiry and invitation, but that's not what it feels like to me. This feels like a raw investigation over and over again, such that I believe the Minnesota Board of Medical Practice was weaponized against me. I feel like my First Amendment rights for free speech have been compromised. I understand the Minnesota Board of Medical Practice has the responsibility and the jurisdiction to govern my professional healthcare services and conduct in the office with my patients with whom I have a relationship. But that doesn't really resonate with what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with here people who had political motivations to come after me. So from my perspective, this feels like a prosecution and a persecution. And when I hear big government and the Attorney General's office come against me by going against my attorneys, and I'm aware of what people like Mark Zuckerberg have said about allowing the White House and political people in power to squash everyday voices, it makes me sick. I'm so grateful to hundreds of thousands of you folks standing by me and supporting me and praying for me. And I'm so grateful for these two gentlemen at my side, because this has been a journey that's been more arduous and drawn out than I might have thought it would be. But I get it. It is what it is. And there's no going back. We're in the arena. We're engaged. I need you there with me. Thank you, James. And thank you, Greg. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jensen. We're honored to represent you, of course, and we took up this fight at UMLC, and I think I can speak for Greg too, because we believe in what this case stands for. And what it really stands for is that Dr. Jensen should be able to, even though he's a doctor, speak on the campaign trail and make political statements to people, even if they're about issues related to public health, without worrying about his political speech being tamped down by big government, as Dr. Jensen pointed out, whether that be through the investigation process, which of course the documents attached to the complaint demonstrate were no invitation or inquiry. They were much more than that. They demanded responses of Dr. Jensen with the implicit threat that not responding could lead to consequences. That kind of thing should never happen. People should not be required, just because they are a doctor or a lawyer or anything, any profession, that they can be shut down, their speech can be taken away from them just because they are saying something that goes against the prevailing government narrative. And so also, as I mentioned before, with us today, in addition to Dr. Jensen, is Attorney Greg Joseph, a great friend of the Upper Midwest Law Center. Greg argued the hearing in federal court today and fielded some very tough questions from the judge and argument from the opposing counsel. So Greg, why don't you give a little bit of a flavor of what happened today in court and how you felt about the argument as it proceeded?
Thanks, James. There's an old saying that lawyers are taught. If the facts are on your side, you pound the facts. If the law is on your side, you pound the law. And if neither one of them is on your side, you pound the table. We have the facts on our side, and we have the law on our side. What we argued today is a stunning example of government abuse over 32 months into Dr. Jensen's protected public political speech. But it's more than that, because the circumstances that led to these repeated and relentless investigations against Dr. Jensen haven't changed. All of the laws that were on the books at that time are still on the books today. The Board of Medical Practice and the defendants that we're litigating against here, everyone has said they have authority today to do the same thing over again. So this isn't just a fight for Dr. Jensen's rights. And we're not only seeking to correct what took place between 2020 and 2023, including 2022 during the entirety of his campaign for governor. We're looking to protect professionals in the future from the same abuses at the hands of the same people. These aren't just physicians. These are any licensed professionals in the state of Minnesota that are subject to these sort of abuses. The First Amendment in this country right now is on very precarious ground. And I mentioned during the hearing, all we have to do to make it go away is ignore it. And we're not going to do that. We put up a fight today. We answered every question and then some with Judge Blackwell. I'm optimistic as to the results, but regardless of what happens, we're just getting started. We won't stop until this is made right.
Thank you, Greg. And again, one thing that a little bit of background that folks should know about is that this case was originally brought in June of 2023. We were in front of Judge Blackwell before on the same motion to dismiss, a Rule 12 motion as it's known. And Judge Blackwell dismissed because he said there was no standing in the case. Now, we respectfully disagreed with that decision, but instead of going to the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals right away, he gave us leave to amend the complaint. So we amended the complaint, which brought us back here today where after the government filed another motion to dismiss. But as part of that amended complaint, we detailed all the different instances in which, while the Board of Medical Practice had no jurisdiction to investigate political speech, they did so anyway and caused harm. Dr. Jensen, could you briefly comment on how many hours you expended in trying to respond to these complaints and the kinds of self-censorship that you had to engage in while you were also trying to robustly campaign for the 2022 race for governor?
Well, there's no question. I put thousands of hours into my responses because I felt like if I made one false statement, one slight distortion, one poorly chosen word, I might pay dearly for it. So I poured over this for years and for thousands of hours. But even more, I could tell, James, that when I was asked to speak, whether it be in Washington State or Minnesota, in Nevada or Florida, it didn't matter where I was speaking. I could tell I was nervous. I was cautious. I didn't want to say anything that could come against me. I have said no to a variety of conferences I've been asked to speak at. Sometimes because I didn't know how the conference would evolve. I didn't know what kinds of things some people might say. I didn't know who I'd be sharing the stage with. I didn't want the Minnesota Board of Medical Practice to have the opportunity to come against me again. I know specifically I said no to a conference next month. I said no to conference after conference. I said no to podcast requests. I've postponed comments because it is chilling. When you're dealing with the possibility of losing your license, that has a real tendency to chill your speech. Sometimes I think people give me too much credit for being strong. There's a lot of nights I lie awake wondering just what the heck I'm doing here. Why don't I just hunker down, get out of the arena, and go sit in the cheap seats for such a time as this? I have a strong sense of comfort that I'm where I'm supposed to be.
Thanks, Dr. Jensen. And, I do think that one comment I would make is we deal with a lot of times at the Upper Midwest Law Center with folks who will come to us with tips about possible lawsuits, concerns about infringing upon their rights. It is a real harm and real danger for people when they stick their neck out. A lot of people just want to do the turtle thing and pull their head back in. We are so grateful for people like Dr. Jensen. We're grateful for other clients that we represent who are willing to put their neck out there and put themselves out there publicly in order to stand on behalf of the First Amendment, in order to stand against government abuse. So Dr. Jensen, we really do appreciate your willingness to stand in this case.
Thank you.
And, last bit I'll give you all in the audience here is in the hearing, one of the things the judge focused on was the question of whether or not there had been self-censorship, which you already heard Dr. Jensen talk about, and whether or not there had been harm in the past. We think that in our opposition brief in this case and in the complaint, we alleged and argued in very clear fashion that all of the criteria necessary for Dr. Jensen to have standing are met. We obviously would be quite disappointed if the court were to decide against us again, but it is clear also, as Greg pointed out earlier, this case will not be over if the court grants a motion to dismiss. We're optimistic that won't happen, but it still could. And if it does happen, we're going all the way up to the Supreme Court if we have to. And we know that we're going to win this case at the end of the day. So I again thank Greg for his excellent work. Thank you, Dr. Jensen, for standing strong. And thank you both for joining me today on the Minnesota Law Report. So that's it for this week on the Minnesota Law Report. Again, thank you all for supporting us out in the audience. We are 100% donor funded. We depend on your donations to bring lawsuits and support lawsuits like the lawsuit here on behalf of Dr. Jensen. And if you all are willing and interested in what we do, we'd appreciate any contribution that you can provide to the Upper Midwest Law Center. You can go to umlc.org/donate, or you can send us a check to our address and we can also receive it there. Thank you again for your support. Without you, that we can't provide any kind of the services that we provide to people free of charge. So thanks for your support. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.